Welcome to the Chiss Ascendancy podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Chiss Ascendancy podcast. This is Josiah, and today I'm actually going to talk about the future of the podcast and what the podcast looks like moving forward from where we're at right now. So for those of you who may be recent listeners or just came across the podcast, we had kind of a large growth a couple of years ago from doing shorts and things like that. Just wanted to let you know kind of what the podcast looks like going forward and what you can expect from us. So kind of going back, I want to break down how the podcast started, how we got our start, what the formula was at the beginning, how it worked, and what things will look like moving forward. So essentially in 2019, The Rise of Skywalker came out. We were super excited about it, and it was the last Star Wars movie ever. It's the last Skywalker saga movie ever. I'm sure we knew that Disney was going to make more Star Wars. But my brother Samuel and I, if you know me, you probably know my brother. We were hanging out with our friend Adam, who's been a part of our life for a really long time. And we were just spitballing, talking about Star Wars, talking about what we liked about The Rise of Skywalker, what we would change. I mean, when it came out, we were like over the moon about it. So there wasn't a whole lot we were wanting to change. We thought that was perfect. Obviously, looking back, there's some flaws now, but we were just naturally talking. Samuel's very, very funny, very witty. We bounce off each other really, really well. And so as we're talking about it, my buddy Adam goes, "You guys have to do a podcast. Like, you guys know the stuff, you know the background, you know the stories, and you have opinions, and you know how to articulate them. And I'm enjoying just being with you guys listening to this conversation. I think other people would too." And I had wanted to start a YouTube channel or a podcast or something to talk about Star Wars for several years. Friends get me Star Wars gifts. My buddy Chance gave me this jacket and this hat. People have given me books or collectibles or things over the years. Like, me and Sam are both kind of the Star Wars guy, quote unquote, in our friends' lives. And I wanted to start a podcast or a YouTube channel for a really long time. And unfortunately, I just didn't have the guts to just start it. I remember whenever years ago, I think it was the 20th anniversary, so it must have been like 2013 or something like that. There was a 20th anniversary of Heir to the Empire, and this is before we knew about Thrawn. I had never heard of Thrawn before. I just saw that golden book, or that silver book, in Barnes & Noble, and I was like, this is supposed to be a really good Star Wars book, and I owned it for years without buying it because I was intimidated that I wouldn't like it because it was supposed to be so good. What if I didn't like it? Did that not make me a real Star Wars fan or whatever? So I owned it for many years and didn't capitalize on the adventure of reading it. And then once I read it, I read it in like 2 or 3 days. I was telling my buddy Finn, you guys probably know him. If you're a fan of the podcast, you've seen him before on us with talking about different shows and things. His tag is Findor Moon on Instagram. Big friend of the podcast. But he's just now starting it. And I was like, dude, once I started it, I didn't put it down. So just brace yourself. But all that to say, I wanted to start a Star Wars podcast. I wanted to start a Star Wars YouTube channel. And the iron was so hot in the months leading up to The Force Awakens. I really, really should have started it then. Me and my wife weren't even married when The Force Awakens came out. We got married in March of the following year. And she has been so encouraging of me to have started this and been really supportive of the whole podcast and everything. She was telling me years ago, 10 years ago, to start a YouTube, to start a podcast, to do something because I have so many thoughts about Star Wars. And I was intimidated of it. And now I see all these people that started channels. Now they're doing this full time, which obviously is amazing. And if I had a magic wand, I would absolutely do that. But so 2020, we decided to jump in and start it. And the very first video was filmed on a GoPro upstairs at our dad's house, and we had our one microphone, and it was just on a chair in front of us, and we didn't have a tripod, we didn't have anything, and we just jumped into it. And a lot of our friends and family were really supportive of it. At the time, Samuel and I were working together, and we had the exact same schedule, and we were both off on Fridays, Adam had a job that was very easy for him to have an open and loose schedule. So he was right there with us. So we kind of started the podcast together, and Adam would be checking our levels and stuff. Sometimes you can hear him laughing in the background of some of those earlier videos before he would get on camera with us, especially when we started doing stuff modularly online and whatnot. We would have not Zoom, but Zoom-like meetings, and you finally get to meet Adam and see him and stuff. But for the longest, it was just me and Samuel. Adam would be there with us, helping us have ideas and whatnot. And we ended up customizing a room in my dad's house. With you guys who have been with the podcast for a long time, you've seen the brick wall behind us with the posters and the pops and the Star Wars figures and all this other stuff. And we were so passionate about it. And you also had COVID going on during 2020. So as much as the world was shut down and really restricted, and it was like a really terrible time for most people, we had a little bit more liberty with our time to make the show happen. And at one point we were doing 2 episodes a week. We were doing a regular episode where we would talk about Hutts or bounty hunters or the voices of Star Wars. Or the other day I went back and rewatched our Star Wars duos thing where we actually filmed in a minivan because we were on vacation somewhere. And so we would do that, and then we would review a Mandalorian episode. So we'd be like, hey, it's Friday. We're going to review Mandalorian. Come listen to us whenever you're done watching the episode this Friday, because they were coming out on Fridays at the time. And every Monday we would have a weekly episode. And I think one of the podcasts that really, really inspired me personally was Blast Points. Jason and Gabe do an amazing job. They love the nitty gritty stuff. They love the crazy, weird, silly side of Star Wars that I'm a huge fan of as well. They have a little bit more of a inside scoop, talking to people who worked on props and doing old cassette listenings and read-alongs and stuff like that. They have an amazing, just their Star Wars brain is just in a different facet than mine is, but their style and their banter and their way that they love all of Star Wars really was one of the things that made me want to really go over the edge and start the podcast. And so from 2020 to 2022, we were pretty steady. And then I guess it would have been maybe spring of 21 or something like that. Samuel moved back to Tulsa from living in Houston. And that is when us making weekly episodes kind of came to a stop. And we would come back once every couple of weeks, and then it was once every couple of months, and we'd have these fully episodes that were still great, we're still hilarious, we still had the same camaraderie, but we just weren't able to be as consistent, not because we didn't want to, but just seasons change. And the good book says for everything there is a season, and everything there's a time under heaven. And so that season of consistency of, at least an episode a week, if not 2 episodes a week, was not a part of us anymore. And we would then do video calls, and that was, it sucked because we didn't have that face-to-face camaraderie that, we normally would have. And there's some latency in the recording and things like that. It's just different. It's just the same thing as streaming is awesome and super convenient. I feel like one of those people in Wally that's just getting put around in a chair everywhere, watching everything on streaming. However, you're watching at the movies is just a different and better experience. Seeing a movie that you want to see for the first time in theaters is different and better than streaming it for the first time. And that's how I feel about the podcast too. I think that Samuel and Adam agree with me. When we're in person, there's just a different feeling in the room. And so we still wanted to keep things going, and we were having fewer and fewer and further far between long form content. And so we started, I started working on YouTube Shorts, and we saw a spike in our viewership. Obviously, short form content is way easier to digest. You don't have an hour to listen to me talk about Ponda Baba, but you do have a minute to listen to me talk about the Darksaber. And so that really took off, and we had, you put out a short and it has 1,000 views, and you're like, well, this is interesting. And then you have something that has 100,000 views, and then you put out one that I think we have 2 or 3 out there that we have shorts that have passed 1 million views. That's really awesome. And, there was a moment where we were doing almost 1 short a day, and then, changing jobs, changing things like that, things changed. And so we have to go back and start doing episodes again together. That's really what we wanted to do in the first place, was make content where we are talking a little bit more at length about what we were passionate about with Star Wars. And we've tried that. and we've done a pretty good job. We've gotten back into it a good bit, and then whenever Samuel wasn't available, I have so many friends, especially off of the Star Wars Instagram community, that were willing to jump on and talk about the Skeleton Crew, or talk about the Acolyte, or talk about the Mandalorian, or talk about whatever. And we've had episodes doing that. So all this to say, the direction of the podcast is just going to shift a little bit. Samuel is wants to be involved, wants to be available, and it's just a different season of life for both of us, where there might be nights that he's available that I'm not available. And same thing for Adam. There's times that he's available that I'm not, or that he is not and I am. And we also lived within about a 10-minute drive from each of us. From my house to Samuel's house to Adam's house, we could get to each of our places in 10 minutes or less when we first started the podcast, which makes it super easy to be consistent and spend that time together. And we still have a group text that we're talking in all the time, but I live 45 minutes from Samuel, and Samuel lives another 45 minutes from Adam. It's like an hour, almost hour and a half from me to Adam. So it's just a different world, and that's being an adult. And so we want to keep the podcast going. I know I speak for them as well, but speaking for myself, I'm extremely passionate about Star Wars. I'm extremely passionate about every area of Star Wars. And so what this show is going to look like going forward is we are going to have long form content. We are going to have longer episodic, the Chiss Ascendancy podcast style episodes that you guys came to know when you first listened to the podcast, that were 45 minutes long, an hour long, whatever. We're still going to have those. However, because of our set schedules and because of things of that nature, they're going to be fewer and farther between, which is okay, because the real, I guess, announcement's kind of too big of a word, but something that I want to let you guys know is there's something that I feel like I really contribute to the podcast, and that's just my knowledge of lore, talking about the, Jawas, and talking about the Gungans, and talking about the Sith 1,000 years this way and 1,000 years this way, and talking about the Tusken Raiders. And I remember getting messages when we put out our Tusken Raider episode years ago, and it was like, holy crap, I never realized at one point a Tusken Raider ruled the galaxy. If you really follow that vein of Darth Krayt, who was Asherad Het, being raised as a Tusken, being a Jedi, falling to the dark, being captured and tortured by the Yuuzhan Vong, hardening his resolve, becoming a Sith, and then ruling as the leader of the one Sith a billion years later, facing off with Luke Skywalker's great-great-great-great-grandson, Cade Skywalker. So at some point in the galaxy, we have a Sith Lord whose roots are a Tusken Raider. There's not a ton of people out there that are just pulling that out of their brain going, oh, wow, look at this interesting set of things. And that's what gets me going. That's what excites me, not just the movies. I love watching the movies. I love watching the TV stuff. But for me, in a weird way, obviously the original trilogy will always be like the OG Star Wars that we grew up knowing and loving. Even for those of us who grew up with the prequels, we saw the special editions of the OGs first, and that's lightning in a bottle, and that's George's baby, and that's always going to be the root of what Star Wars is. But for me, what feels the most Star Wars-y, if that makes sense, is the deeper cut stuff, is the lore, is the comics and the books and the random stuff like that, the audio dramas and stuff like years ago, like in middle school, reading the Legacy of the Force series, where Jason Solo, who is the hero of the New Republic, now becomes Darth Caedus because he sees the silhouette in a vision of a dark man sitting on a throne, and he doesn't know who that is or what that is, but he wants to save his family and his daughter from it. And he ends up falling to the dark in the pursuit of trying to be powerful enough to save it. And in doing so, falls to the dark. And it's just the way you can unpack all of that stuff in a book or even in a comic is just a different depth than what you can do on screen. For me personally, I don't know if you disagree. You can let me know. But in the High Republic, talking about one of our favorite characters named Geode, who's obviously like a running joke because he's this rock, and they'll be like, and Geode was very stoic in his resolve. And it's like, of course he was. He's a rock. He's not going to show emotions. Or you couldn't change Geode's mind. His mind was hardened to the opposition around him. And it's like, of course his mind's hardened because he's a freaking rock. So the fact that his name is Geode and he's a rock, stuff like that is hilarious to me. And you can't portray some of that on screen. And even looking forward to Ahsoka season 2, it's like, are they going to handle Thrawn the way that Timothy Zahn could and unpack in hundreds of pages of literature when you have 20-minute episodes once a week for 8 weeks and then we're done with that season? Can you portray it? You try your best, but that deeper lore, that deeper knowledge is really my favorite part of Star Wars. It's what I feel like if you asked me if we were a Star Wars sports team, what's my specialty or what do I bring to the table? It's the lore that excites me. And so I'm going to try to keep things fresh, and we're going to have long form content where they're longer 45-minute episodes, hour-long episodes, whatever, where we're talking to, bringing people like Mark Thompson on. I would love to get people like Claudia Gray on that wrote Lost Stars, or maybe someone like Karen Travis who wrote the Republic Commando stuff. And obviously these are all long shots. These aren't people that I know. I've obviously gotten to speak with and have met Mark a couple of times, and he's an amazing soul. But maybe getting some of those talks going, would be amazing. I would love to have people on from other Star Wars podcasts. I'd love to have other people on there to talk about theories and books and knowledge and comics and movies and concepts and theorizing and the running joke from the early days of the Chiss Ascendancy of every episode being a prophecy of what was to come in The Mandalorian. But in between those longer forms, what you can expect from the show, I've thought about it. I've looked it up. I've thought, what is a Star Warsy name for what I want to do moving forward and how I can best contribute in between those longer form episodes. And you've seen probably some of it with recent posts and things like that, but I want to run with, it's not a rebranding. The podcast is still the Chiss Ascendancy podcast. I know it's a niche name. I know it's a different name. I know that it's hard to spell. I know that it's something I have to type in people's phones when they ask me what the name of my podcast is, if they see me with a shirt or a hat or something, or if we start talking about Star Wars, I tell them, yeah, me and my brother and my friend have a podcast, and they ask what it is. I'll be like, let me just type it in your phone for you. I know that that's the case, but that's what makes it Star Warsy, And those of you who are in the Star Wars community are like, wow, that's a very niche name. But it's weird how we chose it right before Thrawn was brought back around. So we're going to keep that, but I'm going to branch off of that moving forward in some of the titling and some of the names of my posts and some of the graphic work that you'll see. The podcast didn't break up. Me and Samuel and Adam aren't not friends anymore. We're all still in a group chat, texting all the time. But I've spoken with them and said, hey, do we want to get a consistent schedule where it's an episode every couple of weeks, or how do y'all feel? And they've both told me, we would love to make episodes when we're available, but we know you have this passion to keep making stuff. We want you to keep doing that. And that's very gracious of them. They see that like I have this desire to make content, and they've given me pretty much free reign of doing whatever I want to do. And even when we were naming the podcast, we all had a say in what we thought it should be. And we knew it was niche, and we knew that it was going to be hard to find on YouTube and stuff, and we just went with it. So we're all still a part of the podcast. We're all still having input when there's times that we're all available, especially when new content starts rolling back out again. I would love to do more reviews and stuff like that with them. Moving forward, the smaller short form, whether it's shorts, whether it's like what we did when we broke down, the Amonomon species, and it was just over 3 minutes long, or doing the trailer breakdown and it's a 10 or 15 minute long video. I would rather have a few of those a week, 2 of those a week, or whatever the case might be, and have that consistently. And then every once in a while have a, hey guys, we're back. This is episode 106, 107, 108. I'm going to honor the legacy of the Chiss Ascendancy podcast. I'm not going to have episode 109, 110, 111, and it's just a 20-minute video about Borsphalia from, that's Bothan. I'm not going to have episode 115, and it's just me talking for 25 minutes about, a certain Mandalorian or a certain book or a certain whatever. Those episodic numbers will be reserved for the legacy crew, whether it's me having a guest on, or me and Samuel, or me and Adam, or the 3 of us. Those long form is going to stay true to the heart of what the podcast started out as. However, especially if you're an audio listener, there are going to be more frequent things that are not the 45 minutes to an hour to hour and a half that you're used to. And hopefully that's okay. My goal, if I'm if I enjoy content from someone, I'd rather them have things coming out that aren't as long or as the same thing as I'm used to, because I'm enjoying that person's content. And I'm hoping that our viewers and our listeners are the same way. So moving forward, the branding that I have worked up and chosen is 2 words, and you've probably seen on some of the stuff I've put out recently, but the words Lore Wars is kind of what we wanted to run with. And I used the lettering from the original Genndy Tartakovsky Clone Wars, where the O is the cool crosshair symbol. And the reason why is because it's got kind of a Star Wars-y ring to it, but it focuses on the lore, which again is the thing that I enjoy. Like downloaded a couple of comics recently to really dive into the character of Aslan Rel from the High Republic and focus on him as a Jedi 200 years before the High Republic, or 100 years before the High Republic, and his first encounter with the Nameless and how it turned him to the dark side and how he acted in the final High Republic book as pretty much a dark sider. And I've got ideas for, like, you know, do the Sith have anything to fear in the Nameless from the High Republic? And does it matter? Meaning, if they could defeat them, but the Nameless are kind of what's holding off the Blight, which is basically a disease that's eroding the entire galaxy. Obviously, that's a very niche reference because you'd have to be in the Star Wars books and comics world to understand that. But I have all of these ideas, and I want to get them out there. I want to create. It's a huge stress reliever for me. My wife literally sat me down and was like, "This is good for you. This is something that is a stress reliever for you. I want you to have this." She's basically told me, like, you work so hard, you need to have something to put your brain toward that helps you unwind. And Star Wars has always been that for me. I'm a huge basketball fan. I love basketball. I played basketball my whole life. I love watching it. I love football. But Lego's a huge another passion of mine. But it's always, like, at some point come back to Star Wars for me. And I was part of that crew that grew up in the 90s that got, like, messed with and bullied for reading. Like, you know, I would have, let's say we were in English class and I had won a pass to, like, not have to work that day in English class because I got a certain amount of scores on my tests or whatever. And instead of, like, just whipping out a Nintendo DS and playing whatever, I had the Mandalorian Armor Book 1 of the Bounty Hunter Wars by K.W. Jeter. And that's what I wanted to do for funsies when I had my free class. And, you know, people messed with me for it. And there were times that growing up, I felt like I couldn't be myself and couldn't really and be a part of that Star Wars that was a part of me, because people wouldn't like me for it. And now there's a whole community out there that embraces me for it. There's a whole community out there that knows me as Joe from the Chiss Ascendancy podcast, or Joe from Fed Ventures back when I was doing more toy photography. And that's awesome. And that's a huge part of who I am. And now my kids are growing up and they want to talk about Star Wars, and they want to talk about Star Wars figures, and they want to talk about movies, and they want to talk about Star Wars Rebels. And it's such a huge part of who I am. And so I want to keep this going. I want to continue to create. And my wife was asking me, like, what are you doing this for? What is your goal with the podcast? And so, being honest with myself and being honest with you guys, I think that I enjoy the process of creating. I enjoy the process of producing the content. I enjoy reading a book or reading a comic or listening to an audio book and taking mental notes of something that really is cool and really stands out to me, and sharing those little nuggets and stuff with you guys, sharing those nuggets with, you know, people who watch the podcast or listen to the podcast, or even just friends of mine who maybe we don't hang out all the time anymore, but they listen to the podcast, and that's like their way of still hanging out with me, which is really cool. I've had a couple of people tell me that. It's really, really cool. And so I guess my goal is just to continue to produce, and then ultimately, like, dude, we have like 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. We're not making any money on this thing. That's not the goal. I'm not doing it for money or sponsorship or anything like that. If something were to happen and that ended up being the case, would I do this full time? Absolutely. But are we a zillion years away from that? Yes. But that's okay, because I'm doing it because I have such a passion for Star Wars and sharing it with other people around me. So moving forward, you'll get long form episodes of the Chiss Ascendancy podcast. In between those things, a soft launch of a side brand, if you want to call it that, is the idea of lore wars. So you might see that in some titles, who are the Amani people - lore wars. I want that to be something that if someone searches it, it brings them to our podcast, and maybe they watch some of those longer form content and we, grow from there. But you might see a 3-minute video or a 5-minute video or a 10-minute video covering random stuff. I was listening to the Shadows of the Empire audiobook the other day, and it talked about, and I'm going to make a video about this as well, but it talked about Darth Vader going into a healing trance, which we know now in 2025 through the new canon and everything, that's a Jedi thing. That's not a Sith thing. It doesn't make any sense. But in Legends, in Shadows of the Empire, Vader, aka Anakin, goes into a healing trance and feels himself relieving some of that pain, but the relief and the joy he feels is contrary to who his identity is as Vader, and it kind of like wakes him up out of that vision or out of that meditation. And it's like, well, if I choose joy, then I can't have the anger to be Vader anymore. And if I can't have the anger, then it all kind of came crashing down. And it was almost like it was worth it to seethe in that pain, because he wasn't ever going to be able to really heal himself all the way. And if he lets go of his anger, then he doesn't have as much power as he would have. And it's just a crazy thought of like, Sith don't use Jedi meditation to heal. That's not a thing in canon anymore. Obviously, Shadows of the Empire is from the 90s, and that was a whole wild different world. But just like the detail and the thought process and the intricacy of the joy he felt while healing, the relief from the pain, and how it came crashing down because he realized that his pain was what was giving him his power, his anger in response to his pain. And it's just, I'll unpack it in a more fluent and more articulate manner in a different video. But just things like that, I want to take a screenshot of that in my brain and put that out there and talk about that with you guys. And it's going to be interesting. I'm going to have to learn how to have a balance and not be super serious all the time, because when I record these videos by myself, I'm more serious. When I'm with somebody else, I'm a little bit more jocular and a little bit more funny, and there's a little bit more humor involved, which I think is really one of our calling cards as a podcast. So just finding the balance there. Theo Vaughn has this podcast where he does a lot of stuff by himself, and he's still hilarious. I want to find a way to capture that. But moving forward, you're going to get those longer form content episodes, but expect some of those little nuggets that are 5, 10, 15 minutes long more frequently under the banner of Lore Wars. And that's what we're going to do moving forward. I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you guys are excited for it. I'm excited to get back on the horse and make content again. I'm thankful for my wife, who really sat me down and encouraged me to get these ideas back out there and let that part of who I am back out to the surface, which was a huge conversation. It was really a serious conversation, actually. And she was so encouraging, and it was very cool to jump back into that. So the Chiss Ascendancy is still alive and well. We'll have longer form content here and there, especially when there's content coming out on a regular basis. But in the meantime, on TikTok, on YouTube, on Instagram, maybe more infographics as well, just breaking down characters or whatever, strictly on Instagram and posting those. Lore Wars is kind of a soft side brand that we're launching that I'm excited about. I may even put t-shirts and stuff out there if you guys, those of you who have bought t-shirts and jackets and hats and things of that nature. So that's what we're doing moving forward. I just wanted to kind of get that out there so you guys, if you see new logos and stuff like that, the podcast didn't break up. There's no bad blood. We love each other. We're going to continue to be the Chiss Ascendancy podcast, but this side brand of Lore Wars is something we're launching to have more frequently. So hope that makes sense. Thank you guys for tuning in. May the force be with you always, and we'll talk to you next time.